He didn't marry her for love. He married her for $47 million. Devon Whitmore was handsome, charming, and a board-certified surgeon. She was 63, wealthy, and desperate for the one thing money couldn't buy: a child. He gave her that child. He delivered the baby himself in his own surgical center, with his own hands, and before he closed her up, he made sure she would never survive. For 7 days, he watched his wife's body slowly shut down. He controlled who visited. He screened every call. He told her the agony was normal. She was dying in her own bed, and her husband was waiting to inherit everything. But he made one mistake. He underestimated her mother. Before we tell you how Vivian Louise Hartwell nearly died at the hands of the man she loved, you need to understand who she was. Because this is not the story of a naive woman who stumbled blindly into danger. This is the story of a brilliant, self-made woman who conquered every obstacle life threw at her until love became her blind spot. Vivian was born on March 14, 1958, in a shotgun house on the wrong side of Baton Rouge, Louisiana. 3 rooms lined up in a row, newspapers stuffed into the walls for insulation, and a roof that leaked whenever the rain came down hard enough. Her father, Raymond Hartwell, worked the Mississippi River docks as a longshoreman, breaking his back for wages that barely kept 5 children fed. Her mother, Lorraine, took in laundry and worked as a seamstress, stitching fine clothes for wealthy white families across town, while her own children wore hand-me-downs from distant cousins. Vivian was the third of 5 children, and the only girl among her siblings. She learned early that nothing in this world came free, and that lesson would shape everything she became. While her brothers played after school, she helped her mother press shirts until her arms ached, absorbing the value of honest work long before she understood what ambition truly meant. But even as a child growing up in poverty, Vivian was different from everyone around her. She had a mind for numbers that her teachers noticed immediately, a gift for persuasion that seemed almost natural, and an ambition that burned brighter than anything her small world could contain. At 12 years old, Vivian Hartwell started her first business. She would wake before dawn, help her mother make pralines using her grandmother's recipe, then walk door to door through the nicer neighborhoods of Baton Rouge, selling them for 50 cents apiece. The other children laughed at her, but Vivian kept walking, kept knocking, kept selling. By the end of that first summer, she had saved $47, more money than she had ever seen in her entire life, hidden carefully under her mattress where no one would find it. Her father discovered the cash one evening while helping her make her bed. Instead of taking it or scolding her for keeping secrets, Raymond Hartwell sat his daughter down and said, something she would carry with her forever. "Baby girl, you got a gift," he told her, his calloused hands holding hers. "Don't let nobody tell you what you can't do with it." She never did. Vivian became the first person in the Hartwell family to graduate from high school, class of 1976. She walked across that stage in a borrowed dress, with her mother crying in the audience, and her father nodding with quiet pride that needed no words. But college was a distant dream for a girl from her circumstances. There was no money saved for tuition, no scholarships waiting, no clear path forward from where she stood. So Vivian worked the way she had always worked, with everything she had. She juggled 3 jobs simultaneously through her early 20s, waitressing at a diner from morning until mid-afternoon, cleaning offices at night until her back screamed for relief, and working weekends at a fabric store where she learned about textiles and customer service. Every spare dollar went into a coffee can she kept hidden in her closet, growing slowly but surely towards something bigger. By 22, she had saved enough to enroll in community college, taking night classes while still working days. It was there, exhausted but determined, that she discovered real estate. A night course in property management changed the entire trajectory of her life. Vivian realized that real estate was the great equalizer in America. It didn't matter where you came from or what your last name was, if you understood the numbers, knew how to negotiate, and were willing to outwork everyone else in the room. She got her real estate license at 24 years old, becoming one of the youngest black women licensed in the state of Louisiana at that time. She started with absolutely nothing but her determination. She couldn't afford a car, so she showed properties to potential buyers on a bicycle, pedaling across Baton Rouge in the suffocating summer heat, with sweat soaking through her only professional blouse. Clients laughed at her. Colleagues dismissed her as a joke who would never make it. Doors slammed in her face more times than she could count. But Vivian kept pedaling, kept showing up, kept believing in what she could become. By 1989, Vivian had saved enough to start her own company, Hartwell Properties, LLC. She relocated to Charleston, South Carolina, recognizing the untapped potential in the commercial real estate market before anyone else did. She started small with a single office, a part-time assistant, and a used desk she purchased at a bankruptcy auction for $40. 20 years later, Hartwell Properties had become one of the largest black-owned property management firms in the entire Southeast. Her portfolio stretched across South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida, encompassing commercial buildings, shopping centers, and residential complexes all bearing the Hartwell name. By 2010, the company was valued at over $47 million, and Vivian employed more than 200 people, many of them from disadvantaged backgrounds just like the one she had escaped. The accolades followed naturally. Black Enterprise magazine featured her in 2008 as a trailblazer in commercial real estate. She was named Charleston Businesswoman of the Year in 2012. She became a regular keynote speaker at women's entrepreneurship conferences across the country, and she served faithfully as an elder at Greater Mount Zion Baptist Church. Vivian Hartwell had become living proof that the American dream was possible, even for a girl from a shotgun house with newspaper walls in Baton Rouge. But for all her remarkable success, there was one thing Vivian couldn't buy, couldn't negotiate, couldn't will into existence through sheer determination: a child. And that longing, that decades-old ache buried deep in her heart, would become the crack in her armor that a predator would learn to exploit. Before you continue with this story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and share this with someone who needs to hear it, because what comes next will change everything you think you know about trust. From the time she was a little girl playing with her younger brothers in that cramped shotgun house, Vivian Hartwell dreamed of becoming a mother. She would practice on her siblings, feeding them, caring for them when her parents were working, imagining the day when she would hold her own child in her arms. It was the one dream that never faded, no matter how much her circumstances changed, no matter how far she climbed from poverty, no matter how many zeros appeared in her bank account. She wanted to feel a baby kick inside her belly. She wanted to hear someone call her mama. She wanted to pass down everything she had learned about survival and success to a child who carried her blood. But life had very different plans for Vivian Louise Hartwell, and those plans would break her heart in ways that success could never mend. At 27 years old, Vivian married her college sweetheart, James Patterson, though everyone called him Jimmy. He was a good man from a decent family, steady and kind and devoted to Vivian in the way that made her believe in forever. They bought a small house together in a quiet neighborhood, painted the spare bedroom a soft yellow in anticipation of what they hoped would come, and started trying for a baby immediately after their honeymoon. The first pregnancy came quickly, and Vivian was overjoyed beyond words. She bought tiny shoes before she even started showing, couldn't stop smiling at work, called her mother every night to share her excitement. But at 11 weeks, she woke up bleeding. The doctor's words were clinical and detached, delivered with the practiced neutrality of someone who had given this news 1,000 times before. "Spontaneous miscarriage," he said. "It happens more often than people realize. You're young. You can try again." So they tried again, and the second pregnancy lasted 14 weeks. Long enough for Vivian to feel what she thought was movement, long enough to start believing with her whole heart that this time would be different. She had already picked out names, had started looking at cribs, had allowed herself to imagine reading bedtime stories and teaching her child to ride a bicycle. Then came the cramping that doubled her over in pain, the frantic rush to the hospital with Jimmy driving too fast and praying out loud, and the devastating news that there was no heartbeat. The third pregnancy came in 1990, and it ended at just 9 weeks. By then, the marriage was crumbling under the unbearable weight of shared grief that neither of them knew how to carry. Jimmy wanted to stop trying, wanted to accept what was becoming painfully clear, wanted to find peace with childlessness. Vivian couldn't understand how he could give up so easily on the dream they had built together. At 31 years old, Vivian received a diagnosis that explained everything and destroyed the little hope she had left. Severe endometriosis had ravaged her reproductive system, scarring her organs beyond repair in ways that no surgery could fix. The specialist was gentle but direct as he delivered the news that would reshape her entire life. "Mrs. Patterson, I don't believe you will ever be able to carry a pregnancy to term," he said, his voice soft with practiced sympathy. "I'm very sorry." Vivian sat in that cold examination room for an hour after the doctor left, staring at the blank wall, feeling something vital inside her die. The marriage didn't survive another year. It wasn't hatred or infidelity, or even harsh words that ended things. It was the unbearable weight of shared sorrow that neither of them could lift. Jimmy remarried 3 years later and moved to Atlanta, where he had 2 beautiful children with his new wife. Vivian sent a congratulations card when she heard about the births. She never received a response. The divorce was finalized in 1992. Vivian was 34 years old, alone, and absolutely convinced that she would never have the family she had wanted since childhood. So she did what she had always done when life knocked her down and left her bleeding. She worked harder. She threw herself into building Hartwell Properties with a ferocity that both impressed and worried the people who cared about her. She channeled every ounce of maternal energy into her company, her employees, the young women from disadvantaged backgrounds whom she mentored and guided toward their own success. People would ask her about family at business dinners and charity events, and she learned to smile and deflect the question with practiced grace. "My company is my baby," she would say with a laugh that almost sounded genuine, and everyone would nod politely and accept it as truth. But late at night, alone in the beautiful Charleston home that her success had purchased, Vivian would sometimes walk past the empty room she had never converted into anything else. The room that had been meant to be a nursery all those years ago, when she still believed in happy endings. She would stand in the doorway and let herself feel the emptiness for just a moment before closing the door and returning to her work. Over the decades that followed, Vivian dated occasionally. Successful men, professional men, doctors and lawyers and businessmen who were drawn to her intelligence and independence. But nothing ever lasted beyond a few months. Some were intimidated by her success, uncomfortable with a woman who earned more than they did. Others couldn't understand the lingering sadness that lived behind her accomplished smile. A few simply weren't right, and Vivian had learned the hard way to trust her instincts about people. By her late 50s, she had made peace with her solitude, or at least she told herself she had. She had her work that fulfilled her church that sustained her family that visited on holidays and birthdays. Her mother Lorraine was still alive and sharp as ever, and her brothers had given her nieces and nephews who called her Auntie Viv and loved her generous spirit. It was enough. It had to be enough. But the truth was more complicated than the story she told herself and everyone else. The longing for a child never disappeared. It simply went underground, buried deep in the parts of herself she rarely examined. Every baby shower was a small agony she endured with a frozen smile. Every Mother's Day was a reminder of what she would never have. And every time someone innocently asked if she had children, a tiny wound opened that never fully healed. Vivian Hartwell was 60 years old, wealthy beyond her childhood dreams, respected throughout her industry, surrounded by people who loved her. And she had never felt more alone in her entire life. That loneliness, that vulnerability, that desperate unfulfilled longing would soon attract the attention of a man who saw not a woman to love, but a fortune to claim. To understand how Vivian Hartwell ended up on an operating table with her husband planting instruments of death inside her body, you first have to understand the man who would do such a thing. Because Devin Bradley Whitmore didn't look like a monster when you met him. He looked like a miracle, like an answer to prayer, like everything a lonely woman could ever want. Born on September 3, 1980, in Richmond, Virginia, Devin grew up with advantages that Vivian never had. He was tall and handsome with an athletic build that he maintained through regular gym sessions, and he possessed the kind of easy confidence that made people want to trust him immediately. On paper, his credentials were impeccable and impressive. He graduated from Howard University for his undergraduate degree, earned his medical doctorate from the prestigious Meharry Medical College, and completed his residency at Johns Hopkins, one of the most respected medical institutions in the entire world. By the time he crossed paths with Vivian Hartwell in 2018, Devon was 38 years old, board-certified in obstetrics and gynecology, and known throughout Charleston's medical community for his impeccable bedside manner. Patients adored him. Colleagues spoke highly of his skills. He dressed in tailored suits and drove expensive cars and lived in a waterfront condo that projected success at every angle. He was exactly the kind of man who could make a 60-year-old woman believe that second chances were real, that love could find you when you least expected it, that fairy tales could come true even in the autumn of your life. But the polished version of Devon Whitmore that the world saw was nothing more than a carefully constructed illusion, a mask he wore to hide the rot underneath. Behind that charming smile and those impressive credentials, a very different reality was taking shape. Devon had actually graduated from medical school in the bottom third of his class, barely scraping by when natural intelligence should have carried him to the top. He nearly failed his surgical rotation entirely, saved only by aggressive last-minute studying that got him through the final examination. During his residency at Johns Hopkins, 2 formal complaints were filed against him by nursing staff. Both cited his dangerous tendency to cut corners when no one important was watching, and his habit of dismissing concerns from anyone he considered beneath his station. He opened his private practice, Low Country Women's Health Associates, in Charleston in 2015. From the very beginning, it struggled under the weight of his incompetence with money. Devon had absolutely no head for business. He spent lavishly on office aesthetics and expensive medical equipment designed to impress rather than function. He hired staff he couldn't afford and made every financial decision based on how things looked rather than whether they made sense. Within 2 years, the practice was hemorrhaging money faster than he could bring it in. Staff turnover became constant and demoralizing. 5 office managers came and went in just 3 years, each one leaving with remarkably similar complaints about Dr. Whitmore. He was charming and attentive with patients in the examination room, but impossible and condescending behind closed doors. By 2018, Devon's financial situation had become truly desperate. His student loans totaled $340,000, and he was barely making the minimum payments. Business loans for the struggling practice added another $180,000 to his burden. He leased a BMW 7 Series he couldn't afford and later upgraded to a Mercedes S-Class because appearance mattered more than reality. He rented a waterfront condominium at $4,500 per month, despite having negative cash flow almost every single month. Credit cards were maxed across 4 different accounts, and collection agencies had started calling with increasing frequency. But Devon's financial troubles ran even deeper than poor business decisions and champagne tastes on a beer budget. He harbored a secret that had been devouring his finances for 15 long years. Devon Bradley Whitmore was a gambling addict, and his addiction had grown into a monster he could no longer control. It started at 23 years old during a friend's bachelor party in Atlantic City. Just a fun weekend with the boys, some cards, some drinks, the thrill of possibility and risk. He won $600 that first night playing blackjack, and something clicked in his brain like a switch being flipped. The rush of winning consumed him. The high became something he chased obsessively. The feeling that he had discovered a shortcut to the wealthy life he believed he deserved took root and never let go. What began as weekend entertainment transformed into a devastating compulsion that ruled his life. By his late 20s, Devon was a regular at underground poker games in Charleston's back rooms, the kind of establishments that didn't report winnings to the IRS and didn't ask questions about where the money came from. He bet recklessly on college football games with bookies who accepted IOUs and charged interest that would make a loan shark blush. In 2016, he lost $15,000 in a single catastrophic weekend back in Atlantic City, chasing losses until his credit cards were maxed and his bank account showed nothing but zeros. By the time he met Vivian Hartwell, Devon owed approximately $95,000 to people who didn't send polite collection letters or file lawsuits in civil court. These were men who communicated through intermediaries with thick necks and cold eyes. men who showed up at his medical office with messages that were never written down and never forgotten. Devon's personal relationships revealed a disturbing pattern that would later prove significant to investigators. His first wife, Denise Franklin, married him in 2009, full of hope, and divorced him in 2013, full of regret. The court documents cited financial irresponsibility and emotional manipulation as grounds for dissolution. Buried in those records was a damning allegation that Devon had forged her signature on loan applications, taking out substantial debt in both their names without her knowledge or consent. After the divorce, he dated a pharmaceutical sales representative named Stephanie Mercer for 18 months before she ended things, deeply disturbed by comments he made with increasing frequency and comfort. She would later tell investigators he was obsessed with finding a wealthy woman. He used to joke about it constantly, but there was always this edge underneath the jokes. He once told me, "I need to marry rich. That's my retirement plan." I laughed at the time because I thought he was kidding. I don't laugh about it anymore. By 2018, Devon Whitmore had arrived at a cold conclusion. His lifestyle was unsustainable. His debts were insurmountable. His practice was failing, and the men he owed money to were growing dangerously impatient. He needed a way out, and he found it in Vivian Hartwell. I want to know where you're watching this from, so drop your location in the comments below. And if you've made it this far into the story, type, "I am still here," so I can see who's really paying attention. Because trust me, you're going to want to stay for what happens next. October 14th, 2018. The Charleston Medical Foundation held its annual charity gala at the historic Mills House Hotel, where crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables dressed in white linen, and the city's elite gathered in their finest evening wear. Vivian Hartwell was there as a major donor, seated at a prominent table near the front of the ballroom, making polite conversation with other philanthropists about upcoming community projects. Devon Whitmore was there as an honoree, being recognized for volunteer work at a free clinic serving uninsured patients. It was a calculated move he had made specifically to position himself in rooms exactly like this one, surrounded by wealthy donors with checkbooks and lonely hearts. He had studied the guest list in advance. He knew Vivian would be attending. He knew where she would be seated. He knew precisely what he planned to say when he approached her. He found her at the silent auction, examining a vacation package to the Amalfi Coast, her reading glasses perched on her nose as she reviewed the details. His opening line was nothing remarkable, just casual conversation about the Italian coastline, the quality of light in that part of the world, whether she had ever traveled there. But what came next was carefully calibrated to set him apart from every other man who had ever approached Vivian Louise Hartwell. He asked about her business, not her appearance or her elegant dress or the diamond earrings catching the candlelight. Her business. He asked intelligent, specific questions about commercial real estate trends and market pressures and the challenges of running a large organization with hundreds of employees. He treated her as an equal, as a professional, as someone whose mind was far more interesting than her jewelry or her bank account. Vivian was intrigued despite herself, and Devon knew he had found the crack in her armor. Most men at these charity events either fawned over her wealth in ways that made her uncomfortable, or were so intimidated by her success that they could barely maintain eye contact. This man seemed to care about neither. He seemed genuinely interested in her thoughts, her experiences, her hard-won wisdom about the business world. Devon didn't rush toward his goal because rushing would have made her suspicious. A woman as accomplished as Vivian would recognize desperation immediately, would see through cheap flattery and obvious manipulation. So he moved slowly and deliberately, like a hunter who understood that patience was the deadliest weapon of all. Their first real date came 3 weeks after the gala, a jazz concert at the Charleston Music Hall, her favorite venue in the city. He had researched that preference carefully, though she had no way of knowing. He seemed genuinely interested in the music, asked about her favorite artists, and didn't check his phone a single time throughout the entire evening. He remembered every detail she mentioned and deployed them strategically over the following months. Her favorite flowers were peonies, so arrangements appeared at her office on random Tuesdays. Her mother's birthday was in November, so Devon sent Lorraine a thoughtful card with a handwritten note. Vivian preferred white wine to red, walked every morning at 6, and attended the 11 o'clock service at Greater Mount Zion Baptist Church. Devon absorbed these details like a sponge and used them to construct the illusion of a man who truly knew her, truly cared about her, truly wanted nothing more than her happiness. Winning over Vivian's family was essential to his plan, and he approached the challenge with the same methodical precision he brought to everything else. Her brothers were protective, especially William, the eldest, who had always scrutinized her suitors with justified skepticism. At the first family dinner, Devon came fully prepared to charm them all. He talked football with the men, knowledgeable but never arrogant, willing to listen and quick with a self-deprecating joke when appropriate. He complimented Lorraine's cooking and asked for recipes with apparent sincerity. He noticed that one of Vivian's nephews was struggling with college applications and offered to review them personally. He attended church with Vivian without being asked, sang the hymns with conviction, and shook the pastor's hand with firm respect. Most of the family was thoroughly charmed by this handsome, successful doctor who had chosen their Vivian. Most of them, but not all. William pulled his sister aside after that first dinner, his brow furrowed with concern he couldn't quite articulate. "Something about him doesn't sit right with me, Viv," he said quietly so no one else could hear. "He's too smooth, too perfect. Real people have rough edges." Vivian dismissed his concern with the confidence of a woman who wanted to believe. "You're just being protective," she told him. "You don't know him like I do." Part of Devon's brilliance was what he carefully avoided doing. He never asked about her finances directly. He never mentioned money or expressed curiosity about her company's valuation. He never let his eyes linger on the expensive art hanging in her home or the luxury car in her garage. Whenever conversation drifted toward wealth, he changed the subject smoothly, pivoting to questions about her childhood or her dreams or her interests. When she offered to pay for dinners or weekend trips, he insisted on paying himself, even though he was charging everything to nearly maxed credit cards that he could barely service. The appearance of financial independence was crucial to his deception. He needed her to believe, completely and without doubt, that he wanted Vivian Hartwell the woman, not Vivian Hartwell the fortune. It worked perfectly. For Vivian, the courtship was intoxicating in ways she hadn't experienced since her 20s. After decades of professional triumph but personal loneliness, here was a man who seemed to see her clearly, not the businesswoman or the philanthropist or the church elder, but the woman underneath all those roles who had dreams and fears and desperately wanted to be loved. She found herself thinking about Devon constantly. She looked forward to his calls and his texts, and the way he laughed at her jokes like she was the most delightful person in any room. In October 2019, after 14 months of patient strategic courtship, Devon arranged a private sunset cruise in Charleston Harbor. The water shimmered gold in the fading light as he produced a ring, a 3-carat diamond purchased entirely on credit. "Vivian, will you marry me?" She said yes before he finished the question, tears streaming down her face, completely unaware that she had just agreed to marry her own executioner. February 14th, 2020, Valentine's Day. The wedding took place at Greater Mount Zion Baptist Church, the same sanctuary where Vivian had worshipped faithfully for 20 years, where she had prayed through her darkest moments and celebrated her greatest triumphs. 75 guests filled the polished wooden pews, an intimate gathering by Charleston standards, watching as white roses lined the aisle and candles flickered in the afternoon light. The gospel choir sang hymns that had been in Vivian's family for generations, filling the sacred space with music that felt like a blessing from heaven itself. Devon stood at the altar in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, looking every bit the devoted groom that everyone expected to see. When Vivian walked down the aisle on her brother William's arm, wearing an elegant cream-colored gown that suited her age and dignity, Devon wiped away a tear. The congregation sighed at the beautiful display of emotion. Only William noticed that Devon's eyes, even while wet with apparent feeling, never quite lost their calculating quality, like a man watching an investment finally mature after years of patient waiting. The reception followed at the Bellman Charleston place, elegant and refined, and exactly what a woman of Vivian's accomplishments deserved. Devon gave a toast that brought the entire room to tears, speaking eloquently about second chances and love found later in life, and the unexpected blessing of meeting his soulmate when he had almost given up on finding her. "Vivian Hartwell is the most remarkable woman I have ever known," he said, his voice breaking convincingly. "She taught me that it's never too late for happiness. I promise to spend the rest of my life making her feel as loved as she makes me feel every single day." Vivian believed every word because she needed to believe, because the alternative was too painful to consider. In the weeks before the wedding, Vivian's attorney, Catherine Mitchell, had insisted firmly on a prenuptial agreement. This was standard practice for someone of Vivian's substantial wealth, and Catherine was direct about the necessity. "You're worth $47 million, Vivian," she said during their consultation. "I know you love this man, but you need to protect yourself and everything you've built." Devon signed the prenuptial agreement without a single word of complaint. No negotiation, no pushback, no wounded masculine pride that would have been perfectly understandable given the circumstances. "Of course I'll sign it," he said with an easy smile that reassured everyone in the room. "I'm not marrying Vivian for her money. I have my own career. I just want us to be together." His gracious acceptance was itself a calculated move designed to appear trustworthy and disinterested in her finances. Vivian's attorney was satisfied that her client was protected. Vivian herself was deeply touched by Devon's willingness to put her concerns above his ego. But Devon had already identified the fatal gap in the agreement. The prenup protected Vivian's assets during the marriage and in the event of divorce. It carefully addressed what would happen to her estate if she chose to leave him, but it did not adequately address what would happen if she died. And it said absolutely nothing about inheritance rights of children born to the marriage. Within weeks of the wedding, Devon began repositioning himself within Vivian's financial life with the patience of a spider spinning a web. He started subtly, asking innocent questions about her accounts and suggesting ways to streamline their household finances for convenience. Vivian saw nothing suspicious in this. He was her husband now. Marriage meant partnership and shared responsibility. She had managed everything alone for so long that it actually felt good to have someone willing to share the burden with her. Devon's first significant financial move came disguised as responsible planning. He suggested new life insurance policies, framing the conversation around mutual protection and practical foresight. "If something happened to either of us, we need to know the other one is taken care of," he explained reasonably. "It's just good financial planning for our future together." By April 2020, just 2 months after the wedding, Vivian had taken out a life insurance policy worth $7 million. The sole beneficiary was Devon Bradley Whitmore. The policy included an accidental death rider that would double the payout to $14 million if she died under certain specific circumstances. Devon's fingerprints were nowhere near the actual paperwork. He had simply planted the suggestion and let Vivian's trust do all the work for him. In June 2020, Devon recommended that Vivian review and update her estate documents to reflect her new marital status. He even suggested an attorney, a college acquaintance of his conveniently located outside Charleston, someone Vivian had never worked with before and whose loyalty was questionable. The new documents contained several key provisions that Devon had carefully designed. Everything Vivian owned would pass to her spouse, and any children upon her death. Devon would be named executor and sole trustee of any assets held for minor children. He would have complete authority over Hartwell properties until any heirs reached the age of 30. Vivian reviewed the documents, and the legal language seemed reasonable for a married woman planning for her family's future. She signed without hesitation because she trusted her husband completely. What she didn't realize was that the new structure essentially handed Devon total control over her $47 million empire, but only if there was a child to inherit it. That's when he started talking about babies. "I know your history," Devon said softly one evening, stroking her hair as they lay in bed together. "I know what you've been through. But medical science has come so far. IVF, egg donation, surrogacy. There are options now that didn't exist when you were younger, and I would love nothing more than to have a family with you. A real family. Our family." Vivian felt tears welling in her eyes as the dream she had buried decades ago suddenly resurfaced with painful intensity. "I'm 62 years old," she whispered. "It's too late for me." Devon kissed her forehead gently. "It's not too late," he promised. "Not if we want it badly enough. And I want it, Vivian. I want a child with you more than anything." She wept in his arms, loving him more in that moment than she had ever loved anyone. She had no idea that Devon needed a child, not because he wanted to be a father, but because a child was the final piece of a plan designed to leave her dead and him wealthy beyond imagination. If you're finding value in this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with your loved ones, because understanding how predators operate might just protect someone you care about from experiencing the same kind of tragedy in their own life. Spring 2021. Vivian Louise Hartwell, now 63 years old, walked through the doors of the Medical University of South Carolina's Reproductive Endocrinology Department to meet with Dr. Constance Pemberton, one of the most respected fertility specialists in the entire Southeast region. Her heart pounded with a mixture of desperate hope and protective skepticism as she sat in the consultation room, Devon holding her hand supportively beside her. Dr. Pemberton was a woman in her mid-50s with kind eyes and a reputation for honest assessments, and she delivered her evaluation with the directness that had earned her patients' trust for decades. At Vivian's age, natural conception was virtually impossible. Her ovaries had long since stopped producing viable eggs. The severe endometriosis that had devastated her reproductive system decades ago had left permanent damage that no amount of modern medicine could reverse. But there were options, and Dr. Pemberton outlined them carefully with measured optimism. IVF with a donor egg was scientifically possible. They would harvest eggs from a young, healthy donor, fertilize them with Devon's genetic material, and implant the resulting embryos in Vivian's uterus. Dr. Pemberton was careful to manage expectations with clinical precision. Women over 60 had significantly lower success rates than younger patients. The risks of complications were substantially higher at this age. Any pregnancy would require intensive monitoring from conception to delivery. But it was possible. Vivian looked at Devon, searching his face for any sign of hesitation or second thoughts about the difficult journey ahead. She found only warm encouragement and apparent devotion. "Whatever it takes," he said, squeezing her hand. "I believe in us, Vivian. I believe we're meant to have this family." They began treatment immediately, committing fully to the grueling process. Multiple rounds of hormone injections prepared Vivian's body for potential pregnancy. Blood tests and ultrasounds became weekly rituals. Endless appointments consumed her calendar as doctors monitored every aspect of her aging reproductive system. The physical toll was enormous and relentless. Mood swings left her crying over nothing or snapping at employees who didn't deserve her frustration. Weight gain softened her figure in ways that made her feel like a stranger in her own body. Exhaustion seeped into her bones like water soaking through old wood. But Vivian endured every needle, every examination, every uncomfortable procedure without complaint. This was for the dream. This was for the child she had wanted for 63 years. The first embryo transfer took place in October 2021. 2 weeks of agonizing waiting followed, filled with prayers and desperate hope and the constant checking of symptoms that might or might not mean anything. Then came the blood test results, delivered by phone with professional sympathy. Negative. No pregnancy had taken hold. The second embryo transfer happened in December 2021. More waiting. More prayers whispered in the darkness of sleepless nights. More hope that felt increasingly fragile with each passing day. Negative again. The failures were emotionally devastating in ways that Vivian hadn't anticipated. She began to wonder if God was sending her a message she had been refusing to hear. Perhaps she was foolish for trying at her age. Perhaps she needed to accept that some dreams simply weren't meant to come true, no matter how desperately you wanted them. Devon reassured her constantly during these dark moments of doubt. "We don't give up," he insisted, holding her while she cried. "Not now. Not when we're this close to everything we've wanted." In February 2022, against Dr. Pemberton's mild reservations about Vivian's physical and emotional state, they attempted a third embryo transfer. The procedure took place on February 14, 2022, their second wedding anniversary, which felt like a sign from the universe. 2 weeks later, Vivian's phone rang while she was reviewing quarterly reports in her home office. Dr. Pemberton's voice was carefully controlled and professional, but Vivian could hear something different underneath the clinical tone. "Vivian, I have your results," the doctor said. "The test is positive. You're pregnant." Vivian couldn't speak. The room seemed to tilt and swim around her as the words sank into her consciousness. She sat down heavily on the edge of her bed and wept with joy that seemed to pour from somewhere deep inside her soul. After everything she had endured, after decades of loss and grief and buried hope, she was going to be a mother. What followed was the most intensely monitored pregnancy in Dr. Pemberton's entire career. At 63 years old, Vivian was among the oldest women to carry a pregnancy anywhere in medical literature. Everything was a potential risk that required constant vigilance. Weekly appointments became the unchanging rhythm of her days. Blood pressure checks, blood sugar monitoring, fetal heart rate assessments, and countless other tests consumed hours of every week. At 24 weeks, Dr. Pemberton ordered complete bed rest. The pregnancy was progressing well, but the strain on Vivian's body was significant and concerning. She needed to reduce all stress, all physical activity, all unnecessary exertion that might endanger herself or the baby. For the first time in decades, Vivian stepped back from Hartwell Properties. Her brother William took over daily operations with capable hands. Her assistant handled calls and emails. Her world narrowed to the nursery she was finally preparing, and the baby growing stronger inside her with each passing day. As Vivian's world shrank to the confines of her bed and her hopes, Devin expanded his control over every aspect of her life. He managed her schedule completely. He screened every phone call, deciding who could speak with her and who could not. He controlled who visited and when, always under the guise of protecting her fragile health and reducing unnecessary stress. Gradually and deliberately, Vivian's contact with friends and family diminished to almost nothing. Her brothers called less frequently, told by Devin that she was sleeping or couldn't be disturbed. Business associates sent emails that went unanswered for weeks. Her church community worried but kept their respectful distance. In her 7th month, Devin raised a new concern with calculated timing. "I've been thinking about protection for the baby," he said seriously. "If anything happened to you during delivery, God forbid, we need to make sure our child is provided for." He convinced her to increase the life insurance policy from $7 million to $10 million and add an additional accidental death clause. Vivian signed the papers without reading them carefully because she was exhausted and hormonal and focused entirely on the miracle growing inside her. She trusted her husband completely, never suspecting that every kick from her unborn baby was a countdown, not to new life, but to what Devin had already decided would be her carefully orchestrated death. July 2022. Vivian entered her 38th week of pregnancy, and conversations turned seriously toward delivery plans. Given her age and extensive medical history, a scheduled cesarean section was the only safe option that Dr. Pemberton would recommend. Natural labor posed far too many risks for a 63-year-old woman carrying her first child. The standard protocol was absolutely clear about what should happen next. The procedure should be performed at MUSC, a fully equipped hospital with emergency facilities, under Dr. Pemberton's direct supervision, with a complete surgical team standing ready to handle any complication that might arise. This was a high-risk pregnancy by every medical definition, and convention demanded the highest possible level of care. But Devin Whitmore had very different plans for how his wife would deliver their child, and he began implementing them with the careful manipulation that had characterized every step of their relationship. Over a series of seemingly casual conversations in the weeks leading up to the due date, Devin planted seeds of doubt about the hospital environment. "MUSC is so impersonal," he remarked one evening while rubbing her swollen feet. "All those residents coming in and out at all hours. Students observing like you're some kind of specimen. You'll just be another patient to them, another chart to review between coffee breaks." He mentioned a friend whose wife had delivered at a major hospital and felt processed like cattle through the system. He complained about the bureaucracy, the endless paperwork, the cold institutional efficiency that stripped the miracle of birth of all its intimacy and meaning. Then he made his carefully prepared pitch with apparent spontaneity. "What if I performed the cesarean myself at my surgical center?" Vivian looked at him with surprise and uncertainty. "Is that even allowed? Is it safe?" Devon smiled reassuringly with practiced confidence. "Of course it's allowed. I'm board certified. I've performed hundreds of C-sections throughout my career without any complications. And I love you. I would never let anything happen to you or our baby. Who better to bring our son into the world than his own father?" Vivian hesitated, something deep in her gut telling her this felt wrong even though she couldn't articulate exactly why. Devon pressed forward with gentle persistence that felt like devotion. "You'll have my complete attention. Personal care from someone who loves you, not strangers who see you as just another patient. Just us, bringing our son into the world together as a family. Doesn't that sound perfect?" She wanted it to sound perfect. She wanted desperately to believe that his desire to be personally involved came from love and dedication, rather than anything else. "Okay," she finally agreed. "If you really think it's safe." Devon kissed her forehead tenderly. "I know it's safe. Trust me." When Dr. Constance Pemberton learned about the change in delivery plans, her reaction was immediate alarm. She requested an urgent consultation with both Vivian and Devon to express her professional concerns directly. "Mrs. Whitmore, I need to be absolutely clear with you," Dr. Pemberton said, looking directly at her patient with genuine worry. "You are 63 years old. You are carrying your first child. Your pregnancy has been high risk from the very beginning. A procedure like this should be performed at a fully equipped hospital with immediate access to emergency interventions, blood products, and neonatal intensive care." She turned her gaze to Devon with barely concealed skepticism. "Dr. Whitmore, I respect your credentials, but your surgical center is simply not equipped for this level of risk. If something goes wrong during delivery, uterine hemorrhage, placental complications, respiratory distress in the newborn, you won't have the resources to respond appropriately." Devon's expression remained smooth and untroubled by her concerns. "I appreciate your caution, Dr. Pemberton, but I've assessed my facility thoroughly, and we have everything we need." Dr. Pemberton documented her objections meticulously in Vivian's medical record. She wrote a formal letter outlining every risk and strongly recommending against the plan. She tried repeatedly to speak with Vivian privately, without Devon's controlling presence in the room. But Devon intercepted every attempt with practiced efficiency. The letter was delivered to their home, and Devon retrieved the mail before Vivian could see it. Dr. Pemberton's phone calls went directly to voicemail and were deleted before Vivian knew they existed. Vivian never learned that the doctor who had guided her through this miraculous pregnancy was desperately trying to warn her about the danger she was walking into. Devon's surgical center, Low Country Women's Health Associates, occupied a modern but modest building in a professional complex on the outskirts of Charleston. He had designed the space specifically to impress patients and visitors with sleek furniture, expensive artwork, and every visual marker of success and prosperity. But the substance didn't match the impressive surface. The surgical suite was adequate for routine, uncomplicated procedures. It could handle minor surgeries and straightforward deliveries without difficulty. What it could not handle was a major emergency. There was no on-site blood bank if massive hemorrhaging occurred. There was no neonatal intensive care unit if the baby needed immediate intervention. There was no trauma team standing by if something went catastrophically wrong. If disaster struck, the nearest fully equipped hospital was 20 minutes away by ambulance. For a healthy young woman delivering under normal circumstances, the facility was perfectly fine. For a 63-year-old high-risk pregnancy, it was nothing less than a death trap. The night before the scheduled delivery, July 17, 2022, Vivian couldn't sleep despite her exhaustion. The baby kicked constantly inside her, as if aware that something momentous was about to happen. At 2 o'clock in the morning, she picked up her phone and called her mother. Lorraine Hartwell was 86 years old, living at Shady Oaks Assisted Living in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Her body had slowed with age, but but her maternal instincts remained as sharp as they had ever been. "Mama, I'm so happy," Vivian said, her voice thick with emotion. "Tomorrow, I finally become a mother." Lorraine was quiet for a long moment before responding. "Baby, promise me you'll be careful," she said slowly. "Something about that man of yours has never sat right with me. I can't explain it. Just please be careful." Vivian sighed with familiar frustration. Even now, even after more than 2 years of marriage, her mother still harbored inexplicable reservations about Devon. "Mama, please, not tonight. Everything is going to be fine. I'll call you as soon as the baby is born." It was the last normal conversation Vivian would have for many days to come. The last moment of peace before her entire world was shattered by the man sleeping beside her. Thank you so much for your incredible support of this channel. We're able to bring you stories like this because of viewers just like you. If you want to go even deeper with us, consider joining our YouTube membership today to unlock exclusive content and help us keep telling the stories that matter. Now let's continue, because what happens next in that operating room will change everything. July 18th, 2022, 6 o'clock in the morning. Vivian Hartwell arrived at Low Country Women's Health Associates, wearing loose, comfortable clothing and carrying a small bag with items she had carefully selected for the baby. A soft blue onesie, a hand-knitted blanket, a tiny cap that her mother had made and mailed from Louisiana. She had barely slept the night before, her mind too full of anticipation and nervous excitement. But her eyes were bright with the kind of joy that comes from dreams finally coming true. Devon met her at the entrance wearing full surgical scrubs, projecting confidence and warmth in equal measure. He kissed her forehead gently with the tenderness of a devoted husband. "Ready to become a mother?" he asked with a smile. Vivian smiled back at him with complete trust. "I've been ready my whole life." The preoperative room was clean and well lit and unremarkable in every way. A nurse named Angela Prescott, A.E., a woman with 12 years of surgical experience, took Vivian's vital signs, while a second nurse named Diane Caldwell prepared the operating room down the hall. Everything appeared normal and professional and exactly by the book. The anesthesiologist, Dr. Robert Harrison, introduced himself and carefully explained the procedure for the spinal block that would numb Vivian from the waist down. She would remain awake throughout the surgery, able to hear her baby's first cry the moment he entered the world. "Do you have any questions before we begin?" he asked. Vivian shook her head, her voice steady with emotion. "Just make sure my baby is okay. That's all that matters." At 7:30, Vivian was wheeled into the operating room on a gurney. Devon was already there, gloved and gowned, arranging his surgical instruments with the practiced efficiency of a man who had done this many times before. The spinal anesthesia was administered with professional precision. Within minutes, Vivian could no longer feel her legs or anything below her waist. She lay on the operating table with a sterile drape blocking her view of her own abdomen, waiting for the moment she had dreamed about for 63 years. At precisely 7:43 in the morning, Devon made his first incision. He cut horizontally along Vivian's lower abdomen, following the standard technique that thousands of obstetricians use every single day. His movements were confident and precise. Whatever else might be said about him, Devon had been trained well in the mechanics of surgery. Layer by layer, he worked through skin, then subcutaneous tissue, then the thick fascia, then muscle. The uterus came into view, stretched and full, holding the baby who was about to change everything for both better and worse. At 8:02 in the morning, Devon made his incision into the uterine wall and reached inside. Moments later, he lifted a baby boy into the harsh fluorescent light of the operating room. 6 pounds, 9 ounces, pink and crying, and absolutely perfect in every way. Devon held his son up so Vivian could see him over the sterile drape. "It's a boy, sweetheart," he said, his voice full of apparent emotion. "Our son. He's beautiful." Vivian wept with joy that seemed to pour from somewhere bottomless inside her. The sound of her child crying was the most incredible thing she had ever heard in her entire life. Everything she had suffered, every loss and every heartbreak, was worth it for this single transcendent moment. The baby was handed to Nurse Caldwell for initial assessment and scoring. APGAR scores came back excellent across every measurement. Heart rate strong, respiration clear, color healthy, reflexes normal. A perfectly healthy baby boy had just entered the world. What happened next occurred during a window of approximately 7 minutes that would later become the subject of intense investigation. Devon ordered both nurses away from the surgical field with a sharp command that surprised them both. "Focus on the baby," he told Nurse Prescott, who had returned to assist with closing the incision. "Make sure he's stable and warm. I'll handle the closure myself." Nurse Prescott hesitated with visible uncertainty. Standard surgical protocol required her presence at the table during wound closure to verify instrument counts and assist with any complications. "Dr. Whitmore, I should stay to help with—" Devon cut her off with cold authority that left no room for argument. "I said focus on the baby. I've done this hundreds of times. Go." She went, against her better professional judgment. For 7 critical minutes, Devon Whitmore was completely alone with his wife's open abdomen and nobody watching what he was doing. During that window of terrible opportunity, he executed the plan he had been formulating for months. He took a large surgical towel, the kind used to absorb blood during procedures, and deliberately placed it deep within Vivian's pelvic cavity. He positioned it carefully against her uterine wall where it would not be immediately visible to anyone examining her afterward. Then he took a Kelly clamp, a metal surgical instrument designed for controlling bleeding, and inserted it alongside the towel at an angle calculated to press against her intestinal wall over time. He arranged both items with surgical precision, ensuring they would escape detection during routine post-operative care, but would absolutely guarantee infection. Then he began closing the incision layer by careful layer, sealing his wife's fate inside her own body. When Nurse Prescott returned to perform the mandatory surgical count, her face went pale with concern. She counted instruments, sponges, and needles twice, then a third time to be certain. The count was wrong. 1 surgical sponge was missing from the tray. 1 Kelly clamp was unaccounted for. "Dr. Whitmore, the count is off," she reported, her voice tight with professional alarm. Devon didn't look up from his suturing. "You must have miscounted. Check the drapes in the floor." She checked everywhere. The items weren't there. "Dr. Whitmore, protocol requires that we verify—" He finally looked at her with eyes that had gone cold and flat. "Angela, I personally accounted for everything in the surgical field before I began closing. The count is correct. I will handle the documentation myself. Do you understand?" Nurse Prescott stood frozen, knowing what protocol demanded, but facing her employer, the facility owner, a board-certified surgeon with decades of experience staring her down with absolute authority. She made a choice she would regret for the rest of her life. She documented her concern in private notes that no one would see for weeks. And she said nothing more as Devon finished closing the incision, sealed his wife's death sentence inside her body, and placed their newborn son in Vivian's arms with a tender smile that masked everything he had just done. Against every standard of proper medical protocol, Devon discharged Vivian from the surgical center that very same evening, just hours after major abdominal surgery. "She'll recover much better at home in her own bed," he explained to the nursing staff with the confident authority they had learned not to question. "I'm a physician. I can monitor her condition personally. She doesn't need to stay in some sterile facility when she has her husband to care for her." By 7 o'clock that night, Vivian was in her own bedroom, exhausted beyond words, but filled with a euphoria that made the pain seem almost tolerable. Her newborn son lay in a bassinet beside her bed, sleeping peacefully with tiny fists curled near his face. She had named him Raymond Devon Whitmore, Raymond for the father who had taught her to believe in herself, Devon for the husband who had given her this miracle. It felt like the perfect merger of her past and her future, of everyone who had ever loved her. Devon played the role of devoted father and attentive husband with practiced perfection throughout that first evening. He brought Vivian water when she was thirsty. He adjusted her pillows when she was uncomfortable. He held the baby while she tried to rest between feedings, the picture of domestic bliss that any observer would have envied. But at 2 o'clock in the morning, Vivian woke with sharp, stabbing pain in her abdomen that was nothing like what she expected from surgical recovery. This wasn't the dull ache of healing tissue. This was something urgent and wrong, like broken glass twisting inside her. She mentioned it to Devon, her voice tight with concern. He barely looked up from his phone, his expression unconcerned. "That's completely normal," he said dismissively. "Your body has been through tremendous stress. Take your pain medication and try to get some rest." She took the pills. She rested. She trusted him because she had no reason not to trust him. By the morning of July 19th, the second day after surgery, the pain had intensified significantly. Vivian described the sensation as tearing, as if something inside her was actively pulling apart with every breath she took. She had difficulty sitting up without assistance and could barely walk the short distance to the bathroom without feeling like she might collapse. Her temperature read 99.8 degrees, a slight elevation that Devon waved away with clinical authority. "A minor fever is perfectly normal after major surgery," he assured her smoothly. "Your immune system is just responding to the trauma. It will pass within a day or two." She wanted desperately to believe him, because believing him was easier than considering the alternative. Devon began screening all contact with the outside world that same day, taking control of her connections with practiced efficiency. Her brother William called to check on her and congratulate her on the baby. Devon answered and spoke on her behalf. "She's sleeping right now. The delivery was exhausting and she really can't be disturbed. I'll have her call you when she's feeling stronger." The church sent flowers with a card asking when members of the congregation could visit and meet the new baby. Devon replied that Vivian needed at least 2 weeks of complete rest before she could handle any visitors. Doctor's orders. Everyone accepted these explanations because they came from a physician who loved his wife, who surely knew what was best for her recovery. Gradually and deliberately, the people who loved Vivian were pushed further and further away from her, each with a perfectly reasonable excuse, each interaction designed to ensure that no one outside the household saw what was happening to her body. By July 20th, the third day, Vivian's temperature had climbed to 101.2 degrees. She could barely stand without assistance. The incision site had become red, swollen, and hot to the touch in ways that clearly indicated infection. Devon examined her with apparent concern, then delivered his assessment with calm reassurance. "Just superficial irritation around the wound. Some inflammation is perfectly expected during the healing process. Nothing to worry about." He increased her pain medication, which made her drowsy, compliant, and far less likely to question what was happening inside her own body. On the fourth day, July 21st, the smell began. It was faint at first, a metallic, organic odor that Vivian noticed on her nightgown when she woke that morning. Something was wrong, something her body knew even if her mind couldn't identify it yet. She mentioned the smell to Devon with growing alarm in her voice. His response was immediate and dismissive. "That's just postpartum discharge, completely normal after delivery and surgery. It will pass within a few days as your body continues healing." She was too weak to investigate further, too exhausted to push back against his medical authority. She accepted his explanation because the alternative, that something was terribly wrong and her husband was doing nothing about it, was simply too horrifying to consider. By July 22nd, day 5, Vivian's temperature reached 102.8 degrees, and she was intermittently delirious. She would wake without knowing where she was, calling out for her mother, confused about the baby crying somewhere nearby. Her abdomen was visibly distended now, swelling in ways that had nothing to do with normal postpartum recovery, and everything to do with the infection raging through her internal organs. Devon had hired a private nurse named Sandra Mitchell to help with Vivian's care, and Sandra arrived that morning to find a patient in obvious crisis. "Dr. Whitmore, her fever is dangerously high," Sandra said with professional alarm. "She needs to see a specialist immediately. This isn't normal recovery." Devon's response was cold and final. "I am a specialist. She's recovering as I expected. Continue monitoring her condition and report only to me." Sandra documented her concerns in her personal notes, but she needed the work, and Devon made it clear that questioning his judgment meant losing her position. On day 6 and day 7, The smell became impossible to ignore, a rotting sweetness that permeated the bedroom, the hallway, the entire upstairs of the house. Vivian's skin turned grayish. Her heart raced. Her blood pressure dropped. She managed to whisper to her husband during a brief moment of clarity, "Something is wrong inside me, Devon. Please help me." He took her hand and looked into her fading eyes. "You need to trust me," he said. "I'm your doctor. I'm your husband. I know exactly what I'm doing." And he did know. He knew precisely what was happening inside her body, and he did absolutely nothing to stop it, because this was exactly what he had planned all along. Lorraine Hartwell was 86 years old with bad knees that ached constantly, hearing aids she frequently forgot to charge, and a heart condition that worried her doctors at every checkup. But there was absolutely nothing wrong with her maternal instincts, nothing diminished about the connection between a mother and her child that transcends distance and time and logical explanation. She had called Vivian 3 times since the baby was born. Each time, Devon had answered the phone instead of her daughter. Each time he offered smooth excuses delivered with practiced patience. Vivian was sleeping. Vivian was nursing the baby. Vivian couldn't come to the phone right now, but she sends her love. "Just tell her I'm thinking about her," Lorraine would say, her voice tight with worry she couldn't fully explain. "Of course," Devon would reply. "She'll call you as soon as she's feeling up to it." But Vivian never called back, not once, and Lorraine knew her daughter better than she knew anyone else on earth. Vivian Louise Hartwell would never go this long without speaking to her mother, especially not after becoming a mother herself. The silence was wrong. Everything about this situation was deeply, fundamentally wrong, and Lorraine knew it in her bones the way mothers know things that can't be proven or explained. By the morning of July 24th, 7 days after the delivery, Lorraine had made her decision with the certainty of someone who has stopped waiting for permission. She called her nephew Maurice, a 42-year-old long-haul trucker who lived in Baton Rouge and who had never trusted Devon Whitmore from the moment he met him. "I need you to drive me to Charleston," Lorraine said without preamble. Maurice hesitated on the other end of the line. "Auntie Lorraine, that's 12 hours of driving at least. Your doctors would never approve." "I don't care what my doctors approve," she interrupted sharply. "My baby needs me. Are you going to help me or not?" They left Baton Rouge within the hour. 12 hours of highway stretched before them, rest stops and gas stations, and Louisiana, giving way to Mississippi, giving way to Alabama, and finally South Carolina. Lorraine refused to sleep despite her exhaustion because she knew, with absolute certainty that defied all reason, that something was terribly wrong with her daughter. Maurice drove as fast as he safely could, watching his elderly aunt in the passenger seat with her jaw set and her eyes fixed on the road ahead. July 24th, 2022, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Maurice's pickup truck pulled into the circular driveway of Vivian's beautiful Charleston home, a colonial that Vivian had purchased with cash 15 years earlier when her empire was first taking shape. Devon answered the door when they knocked, and Lorraine watched his expression shift through a rapid sequence of emotions. Surprise first, then irritation, then the smooth mask of hospitality that he could summon at will. "Mrs. Hartwell, this is quite unexpected. Vivian is resting right now. She really can't have visitors today." Lorraine didn't slow down. She pushed past him with a strength that surprised them both, an 86-year-old woman moving with the determination of someone half her age. "I didn't drive 12 hours to hear what my daughter can't do," she said coldly. "I'm going to see her right now. Get out of my way." Maurice stepped into the doorway behind her, his substantial frame blocking Devon from following. "You heard her, man. Step aside and let her see her daughter." The smell hit Lorraine before she even reached the master bedroom, that horrible, rotting sweetness that filled the upstairs hallway and seemed to coat the inside of her nose and throat. She had been alive for 86 years. She had buried her parents, siblings, friends. She knew what death smelled like, and this house smelled like death. She found Vivian in the master bedroom with the curtains drawn and the lights dimmed low. Her daughter lay in a bed soaked with sweat, the sheets stained with fluids that should never have been there. Her skin had turned gray. Her breathing was shallow and labored. Her eyes, when they flickered open at the sound of her mother's voice, didn't seem to recognize the woman standing over her. "Baby?" Lorraine's voice cracked with anguish. "Baby, it's Mama. Can you hear me? I'm here now." Vivian's lips moved, forming words that were barely audible, each syllable requiring visible effort. "Mama, something's wrong. He won't let me." She couldn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to finish it. Lorraine understood everything she needed to understand in that single moment of clarity between mother and daughter. She pulled out her phone with hands that trembled with fear and fury and dialed 911. "My daughter is dying," she said when the dispatcher answered. "Send an ambulance to this address immediately. Right now." Devon appeared in the bedroom doorway, his face contorted with barely controlled rage at this interruption of his carefully managed situation. "Mrs. Hartwell, that's completely unnecessary. Vivian is under my medical care. She's fine. This is just normal postpartum recovery that you don't understand because you're not a physician." Lorraine turned on him with 86 years of life, and struggle concentrated in her fierce gaze. "Get away from my daughter," she said with ice in every word. "You stay away from her. I don't know what you've done, but I know you're the reason she's dying. I know it." Maurice appeared behind Devon, blocking any possibility of interference. "The ambulance is coming, man. I strongly suggest you back up and stay out of the way." The paramedics arrived at 3:18. Joey Ramirez and Patricia Goodwin, Charleston EMS, had seen plenty of medical crises in their combined decades of experience. They had never seen anything quite like the woman they found in that bedroom. Her vital signs were catastrophic. Blood pressure dangerously low at 72/48. Heart rate racing at 134. Temperature at 104.1, indicating severe systemic infection. Joey looked at the gray-skinned woman on the bed and made an immediate decision. "She needs a hospital, right now. Load her up." Devon stepped forward with professional authority. "I'm her physician. I'll accompany her in the ambulance to manage her care." Lorraine stepped between them with the full force of maternal protection. "He is not getting in that ambulance with my daughter," she declared. "I don't care what he says he is." Joey Ramirez had heard enough and seen enough to trust the old woman's instincts over the doctor's smooth assurances. He made a call that would later prove to be the difference between life and death. Instead of routing to St. Francis Hospital, the nearest facility with connections to Devon's medical practice, he radioed dispatch with different instructions. "We're rerouting to MUSC, full trauma facility. This patient is critical and needs resources we can't find at St. Francis." The Medical University of South Carolina was further away, but it was a teaching hospital with complete independence from Devon Whitmore and state-of-the-art facilities for exactly this kind of emergency. That decision, made by a paramedic acting on instinct and an old woman's desperate conviction, destroyed Devon's entire carefully constructed plan for murder. Vivian was wheeled through the emergency entrance of MUSC at 3:47 in the afternoon, her body fighting a battle it was rapidly losing. The emergency department was busy with the usual summer chaos, tourists with heat exhaustion, and locals with minor injuries. But Vivian's condition demanded immediate priority over everything else. Dr. Patricia Holloway, the attending physician that afternoon, had been practicing emergency medicine for 32 years. She had seen bodies ravaged by disease, by accident, by violence of every imaginable kind. She had never seen anything quite like the woman on the gurney being rushed into Trauma Bay 3. The smell alone told her half the story before she even began her examination. Something was rotting inside this woman's body. Dr. Holloway ordered blood work immediately, barking commands with the authority of someone who knew that every minute mattered when sepsis had taken hold. The results came back within minutes and confirmed her worst suspicions. White blood cell count at 28,000, more than double the upper limit of normal. Lactate levels at 7.2, indicating that Vivian's tissues were starving for oxygen as her body tried to fight overwhelming infection. Creatinine elevated significantly, showing that her kidneys were beginning to fail under the strain. C-reactive protein through the roof, another marker of severe systemic inflammation. This wasn't postpartum recovery. This was massive internal infection progressing rapidly toward complete systemic shutdown. "Get me a CT scan of her abdomen and pelvis right now," Dr. Holloway ordered with urgent authority. "Whatever is causing this, we need to find it, and we need to find it fast." At 4:15, Vivian was moved to radiology, despite her critical condition, because imaging was essential to understanding what they were dealing with. The contrast dye was injected into her failing veins. The scanner hummed to life. Images began populating on the radiologist's screen with agonizing slowness, as each slice of data revealed more of the horror hiding inside her body. Dr. Samuel Worthington, the radiologist on duty that afternoon, leaned forward in his chair and narrowed his eyes at what he was seeing. He clicked through the images once, studying each slice carefully. Then he went through them again, then a third time, because what he was seeing simply couldn't be real. Then he picked up his phone and called Dr. Holloway with a voice that had lost all professional composure. "You need to come to radiology right now. I mean immediately. You need to see this for yourself." Dr. Holloway arrived within minutes and found Worthington pointing at his monitor without saying a word. On the screen, clearly visible against the gray tones of Vivian's internal organs, were two distinct objects that had absolutely no business being inside a human body. A large, irregular mass that could only be a surgical sponge, saturated with infected fluid and surrounded by pockets of abscess formation. A metallic object with the unmistakable shape of a surgical clamp, positioned at an angle against the intestinal wall where it had clearly caused perforation. Both items were deep within the pelvic cavity, completely enclosed by the healed surgical site. They had been there since the cesarean section. 7 days of infection, 7 days of bacterial multiplication, 7 days of Vivian's body slowly being destroyed from the inside. Dr. Holloway stared at the image for a long moment, her face pale with dawning horror. "This wasn't an accident," she said quietly, almost to herself. "Nobody leaves these items in this configuration by mistake. Someone did this deliberately." The calls went out in rapid succession after that. Dr. Nathan Crawford, chief of surgery at MUSC, was contacted and briefed on the situation. Hospital administration was notified about what appeared to be a case of deliberate medical harm requiring immediate investigation. Hospital security was placed on alert. The Charleston Police Department was called to dispatch officers to the facility. Devin Whitmore had arrived at MUSC shortly after the ambulance, identifying himself at the reception desk as the patient's husband and personal physician. He had been waiting in the family area, composing messages on his phone, projecting the image of a worried spouse pacing anxiously while doctors worked on his beloved wife. At 4:32, Dr. Holloway approached him, flanked by 2 hospital security officers with expressionless faces. "Dr. Whitmore," she said, her voice carrying the weight of barely contained fury, "can you explain to me why there is a surgical sponge and a Kelly clamp inside your wife's abdominal cavity?" Devin's face went white. For a fraction of a second, something shifted behind his eyes, as the mask he had worn so perfectly for years slipped just enough to reveal the calculating coldness underneath. Then he recovered with practiced speed, arranging his features into an expression of shocked confusion. "That's not possible," he said, his voice steady despite the circumstances. "The surgical count was verified after the procedure. I verified it personally before closing. There must be some mistake with your imaging." Dr. Holloway didn't blink. "There's no mistake, Dr. Whitmore. My radiologist identified the objects clearly, and my patient is dying because of them." Devin stood from his chair, attempting to assert the professional authority that had always worked in his favor before. "I need to see the scans myself. I need to examine my wife. This is obviously some kind of error that we can sort out once I've had a chance to review." "Sir, you're not going anywhere." A Charleston police officer had materialized behind Devin, appearing with the quiet authority of someone who has done this many times before. "We'd like to ask you some questions about your wife's medical condition and the surgery you performed on her last week." Devin looked around the waiting room at the security officers, the police, the doctors and nurses who were staring at him with expressions ranging from horror to disgust. He searched for an exit, an excuse, some way to talk himself out of this. the way he had talked himself out of everything else throughout his entire charmed life. There was no escape. "I want a lawyer," he said finally, the words dropping from his lips like an admission of everything he had done. While police escorted Devon to a private room for questioning, Vivian was being rushed to emergency surgery. Her condition was classified as critical with survival odds estimated at less than 40%. Even if she lived through the next few hours, the damage to her body might be permanent and irreversible. Dr. Nathan Crawford assembled his best surgical team with urgent instructions. They had one chance to save this woman's life, and they would need everything they had to succeed. At 5 o'clock in the afternoon on July 24, 2022, Vivian Hartwell was wheeled into Operating Room 7 at MUSC. The surgical team that Dr. Nathan Crawford had assembled represented the finest talent the hospital had to offer. Dr. Crawford himself, with 30 years of experience and steady hands that had saved countless lives. Dr. Helen Yang, a trauma specialist, known for her ability to remain calm under pressure when other surgeons might panic. Dr. James Williams, the anesthesiologist who would keep Vivian stable throughout what everyone knew would be a long and brutal procedure. 4 experienced surgical nurses rounded out the team, each handpicked for their ability to perform under the most demanding circumstances. General anesthesia was administered carefully because Vivian's body was already so compromised by infection that even the drugs required to keep her unconscious carried significant risks. Once she was under, Dr. Crawford made his incision along the same line where Devon had cut just 7 days earlier. The moment he entered the abdominal cavity, the full extent of the devastation became horrifically clear. The smell that filled the operating room was overwhelming, the reek of infected tissue and purulent fluid that made even experienced surgeons turn their heads momentarily. 2 members of the team had to step out briefly to compose themselves before returning to their positions. What Dr. Crawford found inside Vivian was far worse than even the CT scan had suggested. The surgical towel had adhered to Vivian's bowel wall, fused there by inflammation and infected tissue over 7 days of bacterial growth. It was saturated with purulent fluid, blood, and bacterial matter, transformed into a dense, horrific mass larger than a softball that had been poisoning her from within. Removing it required nearly an hour of painstaking work because the adhesions were extensive, and cutting carelessly could perforate additional bowel segments and make everything worse. The Kelly clamp had caused exactly the damage Devon had intended when he positioned it so carefully. It had perforated Vivian's sigmoid colon in 2 separate locations, allowing fecal matter to leak into her abdominal cavity and seed infection throughout her pelvis. Multiple abscesses had formed over the past week, pockets of infection ranging in size from grapes to small oranges. Some of them ruptured as the surgical team attempted to access them, releasing floods of infected material that had to be suctioned away before the team could continue. The abscess drainage alone filled nearly 2 liters of collection containers. 2 liters of poison that had been killing Vivian slowly from inside her own body while her husband watched and waited. And then, there was her uterus. The organ that had, against all odds, carried a baby to term at 63 years old, had been completely destroyed by the infection Devon had planted inside her. It was necrotic, blackened, dead. Both fallopian tubes were similarly devastated, damaged beyond any possibility of repair or salvation. Dr. Crawford looked at his team with grim determination. There was no decision to make, no alternative to consider. Only one option would give Vivian any chance of survival, and even that chance was slim at best. "We're doing a complete hysterectomy," he announced. "Uterus, cervix, both fallopian tubes, everything has to come out immediately." The surgery lasted 6 hours and 47 minutes, a grueling marathon that tested every person in that operating room. Removing the surgical towel was the first major challenge because the tissue adhesions required millimeter by millimeter precision to avoid causing additional damage to her already ravaged intestines. Extracting the Kelly clamp required similar care because the instrument had embedded itself in surrounding tissue, creating tracts of damaged flesh that had to be carefully debrided. The damaged section of bowel was resected, 12 centimeters of colon removed entirely, and the healthy ends were reconnected with meticulous attention, because any leak would mean death. The hysterectomy removed everything that remained of Vivian's reproductive system. Multiple surgical drains were placed throughout her abdomen to allow continued drainage of any residual infection in the days ahead. At 11:47 that night, Dr. Crawford placed the final suture and stepped back from the table. Vivian was alive, but her battle was far from over. She was transferred to the surgical intensive care unit on ventilator support because her body was too weak to breathe on its own after the trauma it had endured. Multiple IV lines delivered powerful antibiotics, replacement fluids, and blood products around the clock. The medical team knew that the next 72 hours would be absolutely critical. She had survived the surgery, but surviving the aftermath was another matter entirely when sepsis had taken such a devastating toll. Her mother Lorraine sat in the ICU waiting room and refused to leave, refused to sleep, refused to eat anything substantial. Maurice brought her coffee that she didn't drink, and sandwiches that she didn't touch. Baby Raymond was with Vivian's sister-in-law Patricia, 30 miles away in Mount Pleasant, perfectly healthy and completely unaware of the battle his mother was fighting for her life. And Devin Bradley Whitmore was in a holding cell at the Charleston County Detention Center, formally arrested at 8:15 that evening on suspicion of attempted murder. 4 days after the emergency surgery, on July 28th, Dr. Crawford determined that Vivian was finally stable enough to be weaned off the ventilator. The sedation was reduced slowly and carefully. The breathing tube was removed. Her eyes opened for the first time in days, blinking against the harsh hospital lighting. Her first word was Raymond, asking for her baby. Her second question was, "Where is Devin?" Dr. Crawford sat beside her bed and took her hand, not as a surgeon delivering clinical information, but as one human being about to tell another the worst news of her life. He explained what they had found inside her. He showed her images from the CT scan. He described the surgical towel and the Kelly clamp and the damage they had caused over 7 days of deliberate neglect. Then he told her the hardest truth of all. "Vivian, your uterus was destroyed by the infection. We had to remove it completely to save your life. Your fallopian tubes as well. I'm deeply sorry, but you will never be able to carry another child." Vivian stared at him for a long moment, processing the mathematics of her new reality. She was 63 years old. She had finally become a mother after a lifetime of wanting. And now Raymond would be her only child, her miracle birth transformed into her last chance by the man who had promised to love her. She wept for an hour, grieving the children she would never have and the husband she had trusted with everything. Then she stopped crying, wiped her face, and looked Dr. Crawford in the eye with a determination that surprised him. "Where is Devin now?" she asked. "In custody. He was arrested the night you arrived here." Vivian nodded slowly, something hardening in her gaze. "Good. Now I want to talk to the police. I want to make sure that man never does this to anyone else." Detective Renee Washington of the Charleston Police Department's Major Crimes Unit had been working homicides and serious assaults for 22 years. She specialized in financial crimes and domestic violence cases, the kind of investigations where the violence was often hidden beneath layers of manipulation and deceit. When she received the file on Vivian Hartwell, she recognized the pattern immediately. An older wealthy woman, a younger charming husband with financial problems, a medical procedure that went catastrophically wrong, and a convenient explanation that didn't quite hold together under scrutiny. "This wasn't negligence or accident," she told her captain after reviewing the initial evidence. "This was architecture. Someone designed this woman's death and built it piece by piece." Detective Washington obtained subpoenas for Devin Whitmore's complete financial history within days of his arrest. Bank statements, credit reports, tax returns, business records, loan applications, everything that could reveal the true state of his finances. The picture that emerged was absolutely damning. Total personal debt exceeded $520,000 and was climbing every month. Gambling debts alone totaled approximately $95,000 owed to individuals who operated entirely outside the law and collected through intimidation rather than litigation. His medical practice was drowning in $180,000 of business debt, just months away from complete bankruptcy and closure. Against this mountain of debt stood the life insurance policy on Vivian's life. $10 million with Devin as sole beneficiary. The estate documents that had been signed just weeks before the delivery gave him complete control over the entire Hartwell fortune in the event of Vivian's death, provided there was a child to inherit. The financial motive was overwhelming and obvious to anyone willing to look at the numbers honestly. Medical records from Low Country Women's Health Associates provided the next crucial pieces of evidence. The surgical logs bore Devon's signature certifying a complete instrument count after the cesarean section, a statement that was provably false given what surgeons had pulled from Vivian's body. Dr. Constance Pemberton's documented objections to the high-risk delivery at Devon's inadequate facility were recovered and added to the case file, showing that qualified medical professionals had tried to warn Vivian about the danger before it was too late. Prescription records revealed the excessive pain medication Devon had administered to his wife after surgery, enough to keep her sedated, compliant, and unlikely to seek outside help as her condition deteriorated day by day. Witness statements poured in as the investigation expanded, each one adding another brick to the wall being built around Devon Whitmore. Nurse Angela Prescott sat for an interview that lasted 4 hours, weeping through most of her testimony as she recounted the moment she reported the incorrect instrument count. "I told him something was missing," she said between sobs. "I told him the count was off and protocol required verification. He looked me directly in the eye and said he had accounted for everything, that he would handle the documentation personally. I should have pushed harder. I should have refused to leave that operating room. I knew something was wrong, but he was the doctor. He was her husband, and I second-guessed myself. Now that woman nearly died because I didn't trust my own judgment." Nurse Diane Caldwell confirmed that she had been ordered away from the surgical table during the critical closure phase, an unusual procedure that had struck her as odd at the time, but that she hadn't questioned because Devon was her employer, and she needed her job. Sandra Mitchell, the private nurse Devon had hired to help with Vivian's care, testified that she had expressed serious concerns about Vivian's deteriorating condition and had been shut down immediately. "She was clearly septic," Sandra said with the haunted expression of someone who would never forgive themselves. "I told him she needed a hospital, real medical attention. He said he had everything under control and threatened my employment if I pushed back. I needed the work, so I stayed quiet. I'll carry that guilt for the rest of my life." Devon's previous relationships became part of the investigation as well, revealing a pattern that stretched back years. His first wife, Denise, provided testimony about the financial manipulation during their marriage, including the forged signature on loan documents that had nearly resulted in criminal charges. His ex-girlfriend, Stephanie Mercer, described conversations where Devon explicitly discussed his strategy of targeting wealthy women as a solution to his financial problems. "He used to joke about needing to marry rich," Stephanie told investigators. "But there was always something underneath those jokes that wasn't joking at all. He meant every word of it." The South Carolina Board of Medical Examiners launched an immediate investigation into Devon's medical license. The allegations were severe: gross negligence at minimum, deliberate patient harm at worst, and the suspension was automatic pending full review. If convicted in criminal court, the license revocation would be permanent, and Devon Whitmore would never practice medicine again for the rest of his life. On August 15, 2022, less than a month after Vivian collapsed in her own bedroom, a Charleston County grand jury returned a formal indictment against Devon Bradley Whitmore. The charges were extensive and devastating: attempted murder in the first degree, aggravated assault with intent to kill, insurance fraud, elder abuse because Vivian's age qualified her under South Carolina statute, falsification of medical records, medical malpractice resulting in grievous bodily harm. Devon's request for bail was denied after a hearing where prosecutors argued that he was both a flight risk and an ongoing danger to the victim. Judge Harold Patterson agreed and ordered Devon held at the Alcannon Detention Center until trial. Meanwhile, Vivian filed for divorce from her hospital bed. The papers served to Devon in his jail cell by a process server, who later described his expression as completely blank, as if he had already mentally departed from the consequences of his actions. She also initiated a civil lawsuit seeking $50 million in damages, though no amount of money could ever replace what he had taken from her. Detective Washington closed her case file with a sense of grim satisfaction. Devon Whitmore had spent years constructing what he believed was the perfect murder, But perfect crimes exist only in fiction. In the real world, there are always witnesses, always evidence, always people who refuse to stay silent when silence would be easier. And now the system he thought he had outsmarted was preparing to deliver the justice that Vivian Hartwell deserved. February 12, 2023. The trial of Devin Bradley Whitmore began at the Charleston County Circuit Court under a media spotlight that attracted journalists from across the nation. Judge Miriam Hawthorne presided over proceedings that were expected to last 3 to 4 weeks, given the complexity of the evidence and the severity of the charges. The prosecution was led by Assistant District Attorney Carolyn Dubois, a veteran prosecutor known for her methodical approach and her ability to explain complex evidence in terms that ordinary jurors could understand. The defense was handled by Thomas Sterling, a prominent Charleston attorney who had built his reputation on representing clients that other lawyers considered too difficult or too guilty to defend effectively. Opening statements set the battle lines clearly from the very first morning. ADA Dubois stood before the jury with quiet intensity, letting her words carry the weight of what was to come. Ladies and gentlemen, this case is not about medical error. This is not about a busy doctor who made an unfortunate mistake during a stressful procedure. This is about murder, planned and deliberate and executed with the precision of a surgeon's blade. Devin Whitmore didn't love Vivian Hartwell. He inventoried her. He calculated her net worth, identified her deepest vulnerability, and exploited it without mercy or conscience. He positioned himself as her savior, her partner, her protector. And then he used his own surgical skills to plant the instruments of her death inside her body. But Vivian survived against all odds. And today, you will hear from the woman he tried to murder. Thomas Sterling offered a starkly different narrative when his turn came. What happened to Vivian Whitmore is a tragedy. There is absolutely no question about that, and no one in this courtroom would argue otherwise. But tragedy is not the same as crime. An accident, however devastating, is not the same as murder. Dr. Whitmore is a dedicated physician who made an error under extraordinary circumstances with a high-risk patient. The prosecution wants you to believe a sensational story about greed and conspiracy. The truth is simpler and sadder. Sometimes good doctors make terrible mistakes. The prosecution built its case through a parade of witnesses, whose testimony painted a devastating portrait of calculated evil. Dr. Nathan Crawford described the surgical findings in clinical detail that left jurors visibly shaken, explaining how the positioning of the foreign objects was inconsistent with any accidental retention he had ever encountered in 30 years of practice. Nurse Angela Prescott testified through tears about the moment she reported the incorrect instrument count and was dismissed by Devin with cold authority. Dr. Constance Pemberton presented her documented warnings about the inadequate facility, warnings that Devin had systematically intercepted before Vivian could ever see them. Forensic accountant Martin Hess traced the money with devastating precision, connecting the crushing debt, the gambling losses, the life insurance policies, and the estate documents into a clear pattern of premeditated financial murder. February 21st, 2023. Vivian Hartwell walked into that courtroom under her own power, 7 months after a surgery that should have killed her. She was thinner than before, aged beyond her 63 years by trauma and betrayal, but her eyes were clear and her voice was steady when she took the witness stand. She made brief eye contact with Devin as she walked past the defense table. He looked away immediately, unable to meet her gaze. ADA Dubois walked her through the entire story, from the charity gala meeting through the courtship and marriage, through the miraculous pregnancy and the delivery that nearly killed her. He told me it was normal, Vivian testified, her voice carrying through the silent courtroom. Every time I said something was wrong with my body, he told me I was healing normally. When I complained about the pain, he said it was expected. When I mentioned the fever, he said it would pass. When I noticed the smell of my own flesh rotting inside me, he looked me in the eye and told me to trust him. And I did trust him. God help me, I trusted him completely because I loved him. Because I thought he loved me. I was wrong about everything. Near the end of her testimony, she was asked to look directly at Devin and address him if she wished. She did, holding his gaze for a long moment that seemed to stretch into eternity. I loved you, she said quietly. I trusted you with my life. I gave you everything I had to give. And you tried to murder me for money. You tried to leave my son motherless so you could spend my fortune. You are not a doctor. You are not a husband. You are nothing. The defense attempted to portray her as confused by medication and trauma, but Vivian remained composed throughout cross-examination. I remember everything, she told Thomas Sterling firmly. I remember the pain. I remember begging for help. I remember the smell of my own body dying. My memory is perfectly clear. It's my judgment I question for ever believing a word that man told me. February 28, 2023. After 14 hours of deliberation spread across 2 days, the jury filed back into the courtroom to deliver their verdict. The foreperson, a middle-aged woman with gray hair and reading glasses, stood and addressed the court. Count 1, attempted murder in the first degree. Guilty. Count 2, aggravated assault with intent to kill. Guilty. Count 3, insurance fraud. Guilty. Count 4, elder abuse. Guilty. Count 5, falsification of medical records. Guilty. Count 6, medical malpractice resulting in grievous bodily harm. Guilty. Devon's head dropped when the first verdict was read, and by the sixth, he was motionless at the defense table, staring at nothing. On April 3, 2023, Judge Miriam Hawthorne delivered the sentence with words that would be quoted in newspapers across the country. You are a physician who swore an oath to do no harm. You violated that oath in the most egregious way imaginable, using your medical knowledge to attempt to murder your own wife. You deserve no mercy. The sentence was 45 years in state prison with parole eligibility after 25 years. His medical license was permanently revoked. Vivian sat in the front row holding her mother's hand, tears streaming down her face. It's over, Mama, she whispered. It's finally over. The months following the trial marked the beginning of a long journey toward healing that would never be fully complete. Vivian required 2 additional surgeries to address complications from her emergency procedure, including adhesion removal and hernia repair, that left her hospitalized for weeks at a time. The damage Devon had caused would affect her digestive system for the rest of her life, a permanent reminder of the betrayal she had survived. Physical therapy helped rebuild the strength she had lost during her weeks of being bedridden and septic, teaching her to walk without exhaustion, climb stairs without assistance, and eventually hold her growing son without pain radiating through her abdomen. By the end of 2023, her doctors declared her physically stable. The sepsis was behind her. The surgical wounds had healed as well as they ever would. But some wounds don't show on CT scans, and the psychological damage ran deeper than anything a surgeon could repair. Vivian entered therapy 3 weeks after the trial concluded, working with a specialist in intimate partner violence who understood that her trauma extended far beyond the physical assault. The betrayal was perhaps harder to heal than the bodily damage. She had trusted Devon completely, had opened her heart to him after decades of protecting it, had believed in their love with the kind of desperate faith that comes from wanting something too much for too long. Learning that every moment of their relationship had been a calculated lie was its own kind of dying. I second-guess everyone now, she admitted in an interview given 1 year after the trial. Every kind word, every gesture of affection, I find myself wondering what they really want from me. I know that's not fair to the people who genuinely care about me. But when you've been manipulated that completely, when you've been so catastrophically wrong about someone you thought you knew intimately, it changes how you see everyone forever. She joined a support group for survivors of domestic violence, finding community among women who had been beaten, controlled, manipulated, and deceived by men who claimed to love them. The shared understanding required no explanation, and the comfort came from simply being believed. January 2024. 15 months after she collapsed in her own bedroom, Vivian Louise Hartwell returned to the helm of Hartwell Properties. Her brother William had managed the company capably in her absence, but everyone who knew Vivian understood that she belonged in that corner office commanding her empire. She returned with renewed focus and significant structural changes. The board of directors was restructured with new protections against the kind of financial manipulation Devon had attempted. Background checks for all executives became mandatory regardless of their credentials. Estate planning was overhauled with multiple independent advisors who answered only to Vivian herself. Most significantly, she established the Lorraine Hartwell Foundation, named for her mother, and funded with $10 million of her own money. The foundation was dedicated to supporting survivors of domestic violence through legal aid, housing assistance, therapy services, and emergency funds for women escaping dangerous situations. Devon Whitmore didn't just try to kill me, Vivian said at the foundation's launch event. He tried to erase me, to take everything I built and everyone I loved. But he failed. And now, every woman this foundation helps is proof that love doesn't have to mean vulnerability, that trust doesn't have to mean weakness, that we can survive the worst betrayals and still build something beautiful from the wreckage. Raymond Devon Hartwell, his last name legally changed from Whitmore, was 18 months old when the trial concluded. He would grow up without memories of the man who tried to murder his mother. He would know only the story Vivian chose to tell him when he was old enough to understand, that his biological father had done something terrible, that he was in prison for it, and that none of it had anything to do with Raymond himself, who was loved beyond measure by everyone in his family. Vivian hired a team to help with childcare because a single mother running a major corporation needed support, but she remained deeply involved in every aspect of her son's life. She read to him every night before bed. She attended every doctor's appointment. She marveled at his first words and his first steps, and his fierce independence that reminded her so much of herself at that age. "He is my miracle," she said simply. "The only good thing that came from that marriage. I will spend the rest of my life making sure he knows how loved and wanted he was." December 2023. Lorraine Hartwell passed away peacefully in her sleep at Shady Oaks Assisted Living. She was 87 years old. She had lived long enough to see her daughter recover from the unsurvivable, long enough to hold her grandson and see him smile, long enough to watch justice delivered to the man who tried to steal everything her daughter had built. Vivian flew to Louisiana for the funeral, bringing Raymond with her. She stood in the same church where her mother had worshipped for 60 years and delivered a eulogy that reduced the congregation to tears. "My mother saved my life," she said. "When everyone else believed the lies, when the people who should have protected me failed, my mother drove 12 hours because her instinct told her something was wrong. She is the reason I am standing here today. Everything I do now, I do for her." Nurse Angela Prescott left medicine entirely after the trial concluded. She couldn't continue practicing after what had happened, couldn't walk into an operating room without being transported back to the moment she reported the wrong count and was dismissed. She moved to a small mountain town, took a job at a library, and tried to build a new life far from surgical suites and the guilt that followed her everywhere. Vivian, when asked about Angela, offered unexpected grace. She was a victim too. Devon manipulated everyone around him. Angela tried to do the right thing, and he shut her down with his authority. I don't blame her. I blame only him. Devon Bradley Whitmore remains incarcerated at Lee Correctional Institution in Bishopville, South Carolina, a maximum security facility housing the state's most dangerous criminals. His first appeal was denied in October 2024. He is expected to remain in prison until at least 2048, when he will be 68 years old, if he survives that long. He has never accepted responsibility. He has never apologized. He has never expressed a single word of genuine remorse. Vivian Hartwell's case exposed critical failures in medical oversight that demanded immediate and lasting reform. How had a high-risk patient ended up in an inadequate surgical facility against the explicit advice of her fertility specialist? How had a nurse's documented concerns about missing surgical instruments been dismissed without follow-up or investigation? How had falsified medical records gone unquestioned by the systems designed to prevent exactly this kind of tragedy? The answers revealed weaknesses that extended far beyond one criminal doctor and one trusting victim. The South Carolina Medical Board implemented new guidelines requiring independent verification of surgical counts by personnel not under the operating surgeon's authority. Mandatory reporting protocols were established for any retained foreign object suspicions, with automatic external review regardless of the surgeon's explanation. New regulations required hospital delivery for all patients over 55 years of age undergoing cesarean sections, eliminating the possibility of high-risk procedures in inadequate facilities. The Charleston County Hospital Association developed new protocols restricting spousal surgical procedures and recommending against surgeons operating on immediate family members without independent oversight present throughout the entire procedure. Enhanced credentialing requirements were implemented for surgical center operators, with regular audits that couldn't be manipulated by facility owners. Insurance companies across the country revised their underwriting policies in response to the Whitmore case. Additional scrutiny became standard for large life insurance policies taken out within 6 months of major medical procedures. Beneficiary changes were cross-referenced with significant life events, creating another layer of protection against the kind of financial murder Devon had attempted. March 8, 2024. Governor Henry McMaster signed Senate Bill 1247 into law, in a ceremony that Vivian attended as the guest of honor. Known officially as the Medical Procedure Oversight Act, but referred to colloquially as Vivian's Law, the legislation requires independent surgical oversight whenever a patient's immediate family member performs a significant medical procedure. An unrelated physician must be present during all critical phases of surgery with full authority to intervene if concerns arise. Vivian testified before the South Carolina legislature in support of the bill, her words carrying the weight of someone who had nearly died because such protections didn't exist when she needed them. "No one should ever experience what I experienced," she told the assembled lawmakers. "No woman should ever lie on an operating table, trusting the person who claims to love her, while that person plants the instruments of her death inside her body. This law won't prevent every medical crime, but it will make it harder for predators to hide behind credentials and family relationships, and that protection is worth fighting for." In February 2024, 1 year after Devon's conviction, Vivian gave her only extended interview about the ordeal. The journalist found a woman who had been transformed by her experience, but not destroyed by it. "I spent my entire life building something," Vivian said. "A business, a reputation, a legacy that I hoped would outlast me and help people I would never meet. I almost lost everything to a man who saw me as nothing more than a number on a balance sheet. But I am still here. My son is still here. And we are going to live the life Devon tried to steal from us." The journalist asked about regrets, and Vivian took a long moment before answering. "Of course I have regrets. I regret trusting someone who was manipulating me from the first moment we met. I regret not listening to my brother's concerns when he said something felt wrong about Devon. I regret believing that at 63 years old, after everything I had accomplished in business, I could still be so foolish about love. But I don't regret loving. I don't regret wanting a child with every fiber of my being. I don't regret hoping for something beautiful in the final chapters of my life. Devon Whitmore tried to weaponize those hopes against me, and he very nearly succeeded. But hoping isn't a weakness. Trusting isn't a crime. He is the criminal, not me." She paused, looking out the window at the Charleston skyline she had helped build over decades of tireless work. "My mother used to say that you can't control what happens to you, only how you respond to it. I chose to survive. I chose to fight. I chose to make sure Devon pays for what he did for the rest of his miserable life. And I choose every single day to live in a way that proves he didn't break me. That is my victory. That is my justice." Raymond Devon Hartwell celebrated his 3rd birthday in July 2025, surrounded by family who loved him fiercely and protected him completely. He is a happy, healthy child who knows nothing of the darkness that preceded his birth, and will learn that truth only when his mother decides he is ready to understand it. The Lorraine Hartwell Foundation has provided assistance to over 2,400 survivors of domestic violence since its founding in 2024, helping women escape situations that might otherwise have ended in tragedy. Vivian continues to run Hartwell Properties with the same determination that carried her out of poverty in Louisiana decades ago. She serves on the boards of 3 nonprofit organizations supporting survivors of intimate partner violence. She speaks at conferences about recognizing the warning signs of financial abuse and predatory relationships. And she spends every moment she can with her son, reading to him before bed, watching him grow, determined that he will know how much his mother fought to be there for him. Devin Bradley Whitmore will spend the rest of his life behind bars, remembered not as the talented surgeon he claimed to be, but as the monster who tried to murder his wife on the operating table. His appeals have been denied. His license is permanently revoked. His future holds nothing but the gray walls of a prison cell, and the knowledge that his perfect plan failed because he underestimated the very people he dismissed as unimportant. The nurse who documented her concerns, the mother who drove 12 hours on instinct, the wife who refused to die quietly. Vivian Hartwell waited 63 years to become a mother. She trusted a man who promised her everything. She nearly died at his hands, but she survived. Because sometimes love does win, not the false love of predators who see people as opportunities, but the real love of mothers and nurses, and strangers who refuse to look away when something is wrong. That love saved Vivian Hartwell's life. And her story stands as a reminder for all of us to be careful who we trust, to listen to our instincts when something feels wrong, and to never underestimate the power of the people who are willing to fight for us. Thank you so much for watching this entire documentary. If this story moved you, please remember to like this video, share it with everyone you know, and subscribe to this channel so you never miss another story like this one. Your support makes everything we do possible, and together we can keep shining a light on the truth. Until next time, stay safe, trust your instincts, and take care of each other.